Exchanging guilt for grace, a spiritual practice for the new year. Now, most of us would prefer to talk about grace because, let's face it, guilt is miserable. But what if guilt, the right kind of guilt, brings with it potential for treasures for our souls? Hi, I'm Dr. K.P. McKee. I'm the founder and executive director of the Spacious Place Creativity and Spirituality Center. And as we go through this, we welcome your questions and your comments. We would love this to be a discussion. Let's face it, guilt is a painful subject, but one that most of us share in common. So as we get into this practice, you're only going to need a couple of supplies. We have a flowchart on our website that you can download to walk through this practice with us, and then you're just going to need some kind of writing utensil and your own self, and that's it. I brought a candle just because it's a reminder that there is love and warmth in the world and gives me courage to face my own things that I feel guilty about. So just before we begin, just a caveat here. The spirit is wild and free and cannot be enclosed within any kind of a flow chart. At the same time, it helps me to have a visual form for spiritual things that I can look at, and it helps center my thoughts. So I'm hoping that for you too, that this form will help you connect with God's truth for you and for your soul. As we begin, let's just do some breathing, because that not only refreshes us, but it heightens our awareness. So we're going to want to get in our chair where we're feeling balanced and centered. And then we can cast our eyes down or close them and move our breathing from high up here in our chest down to our abdomen, what we call belt buckle breathing. So let's slow our breathing and take some breaths together as we begin. Lower your shoulders. And we'll deepen our breathing. And when we're ready, we're going to bring ourselves into the practice. Now, as you do this practice, I'd encourage you to find a space where you can give yourself time and a space that feels private. Because, let's face it, thinking about things that cause us to feel guilty is uncomfortable. And any external shaming just magnifies that so that it just feels too miserable even to bear. But know this, that in looking at this, you are alone with God, who already knows you all in all, the whole truth of you, and accepts you just as you are. So it's safe to be completely honest here. So the first thing we're going to do is say what I feel guilty about. We're going to clarify it by putting words around it, which helps us know exactly what we're dealing with. And then, once we have filled this out and set it, we're going to look at it and decide something. We're going to move to this side of the flow chart. And we're going to ask ourselves, does this guilt that I feel make me feel unworthy to take positive action? And or is the source of my guilt something that I have power to change? For instance, I am a woman born in Texas. I am 64 years old and I have depression. I have been told that I need to feel guilty about every one of those things for one reason or another. And depression especially tells me that I don't have a right to act for good in the world because there's so much wrong with me. But when I look at it, those are 4 things that I did not get a choice about. We don't get to choose the package we arrived in the world in. What we can choose is what we do with what we've been given. So those things that we feel guilty about, that tell us we have no choice to be or to act, those things that tell us that who we are at our core, that we have no choice about being, are wrong, that is toxic guilt. So how are we going to deal with toxic guilt? Instead, we are going to choose, when those thoughts intrude, to focus instead on thoughts that are positive and loving. Perhaps I'm going to think about someone I care about. Or perhaps I'm going to plan an art project that I would like to do that I think will do the world good. And then we're going to follow up by acting on those things, saying a prayer for that person whom I love, or beginning the work on that art project. And we need to know this is very important. Sometimes we need to recognize that this positive act that we're taking, can we come down here, David, and focus on this? That may be consulting a professional counselor to help us with our guilt feelings. Because if you're dealing with depression, if you're dealing with OCD or something else, you need a professional to help you with all of that. So that is how we deal with toxic guilt. And that is guilt that we set aside because it does no one, including ourselves, any good at all. Let's move over here, though. Does our guilt result from a choice we've made? And can we be hopeful that we can do and be better than this thing that we chose to do before? That is productive guilt, because that can move us into better soul health. What do we do to get there, though? The first thing we want to do is own and confess. And we can write ourselves a prayer. And I love writing this down or drawing it out because, again, it clarifies for us. And it's not just, this guilt doesn't just follow us around because we have not been clear about what we feel guilty about. So we write it down. This is what I feel guilty about. I did this. I chose to have this attitude, whatever. And then we think about what we can do to make amends, and we write it down or we draw it out. And it may be that you can make amends to a person or a group. That may be, for whatever reason, something you cannot do. Perhaps it would be more hurtful to do this. In that case, we make our amends directly to God, and we say to God what it is that we have done wrong, and we ask for forgiveness, because that is all any of us can do. And then we move from our prayer confession into action, because lots of times we get trapped in this cycle, this down the rabbit hole of feeling guilty, and we think that confessing and feeling guilty is what it's all about, when that is absolutely not what it's all about. The purpose of confession is for us to move into abundant life. So we're going to say it, we're going to learn from it, and then we're going to move on. So this last step, and David, if you'll focus in here, we're going to move into loving action. And we set ourselves an end date. So by a certain day or time, I'm going to do this action that will make amends, whatever that will be. So this way, we move it fully into the freedom that grace has to offer us. And what we carry with us is not the guilt, but what we've learned from our experience. And we are closer to being what God hopes that we can be. So if this has been helpful and productive for your soul, we hope you will like it on Facebook. Also, visit our website, www.aspaciousplace.com, and you can see the other things that we are offering. We'd love to hear suggestions from you about things you'd like to see in this venue or other things that we offer. And let your friends know. We will be reposting this on Facebook, on YouTube, and on our site, so that at your leisure, when you're at a private place, you can go through this on your own. Our next Facebook Live is February 24th at the same time, and we hope you will join us again for that. So let's close together with prayer. Guilt is miserable, God. Give us clarity to discern what is toxic guilt from what is positive guilt. And if it is toxic, help us to set our minds and our actions on what is loving and productive. And if it is positive, productive guilt, help us to confess, to make amends, and then to move into the freedom that your grace affords us. Amen. Thank you for joining us.